If you can't solve this, don't bother stepping any closer. Nathan Clarke's voice sliced through the velvet hush of the Veraritoss Lounge, the words hanging like lightning in a stormy sky, charging every gaze in the room with anticipation. Crystal flutes trembled in delicate hands, the scent of roasted duck and truffle oil swirling with tension, and the soft hum of a string quartet seemed to pause mid-note, as if the world itself was holding its breath. At the center of the polished mahogany floor stood Aaliyah Johnson, her black uniform pressed crisply, hair tied back in a neat bun, and eyes that shimmered with quiet confidence, surveying the cluster of wealthy investors, tech moguls, and influencers who had gathered for the most exclusive dinner of the year. Nathan's smirk was sharp, his tailored navy suit impeccable, his watch glinting under the low amber lights as he leaned slightly forward, holding a sleek tablet displaying a complex grid of numbers and logic puzzles. Every guest could feel the weight of the challenge, the unspoken bet embedded in his words, yet their glances constantly flicked toward Aaliyah, as if daring her to fail. She didn't flinch. She didn't take a step back. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, her posture steady like a dancer poised at the edge of a leap. And in that calm stance, she carried the unspoken knowledge of countless late nights studying, problem-solving, and observing the world quietly, learning patterns the powerful thought they controlled. Nathan's lips curled into a mocking grin. "I wouldn't waste my time if I were you," he murmured to the table, not looking directly at her, but letting the words float in the air like a knife's shadow, eliciting soft chuckles from those seated nearby, yet none of the mirth touched Aaliyah. She shifted her weight slightly, scanning the arrangement of equations and symbols on the tablet, noticing the subtle misdirections and traps Nathan had laid in plain sight. And in the movement of her gaze, there was both patience and precision, a mind sharpening quietly under pressure. The air felt electric, every footstep on the polished floor a drumbeat echoing tension through the room, and the ambient lighting cast long, dramatic shadows that danced along the high ceilings, emphasizing the divide between the confident billionaires and the poised, underestimated server. Nathan continued to speak, his tone dripping with arrogance, describing the challenge's stakes, the impossible odds, and the potential $100 million prize with theatrical flourish, punctuating every sentence with a self-satisfied nod and a raised eyebrow that seemed to say, "You'll never measure up." Aaliyah's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes flicking between the logical structure of the puzzle and the patterns of the people around her, noting how many were leaning forward, phones raised discreetly, recording what they expected to be a spectacle of failure, yet she carried no anxiety, only focus and clarity. Behind her, the polished silverware gleamed under soft golden lights, reflecting the expressions of disbelief that would soon come, and the faint scent of vanilla and citrus from candlelit centerpieces mingled with the weight of anticipation. She took a slow, deliberate breath, muscles relaxed, heart steady, and began to map possibilities mentally, weaving through the complex web Nathan had designed with a precision born of invisible preparation. The murmurs around the table grew, subtle but perceptible, as the wealthy diners sensed the shift in energy, the quiet storm gathering in the presence of someone who had been written off, but now radiated competence without a word. Nathan's smirk faltered slightly, an imperceptible twitch of his jaw, as Aaliyah's eyes glimmered with understanding, tracing connections, spotting the overlooked, the misdirected, the elegant solution hidden in plain view. In that suspended moment, every polished surface, every crystal glass, every flicker of candlelight seemed to amplify the stakes, the power dynamics, the silent potential for reversal. She leaned slightly closer to the tablet, fingertips brushing lightly against the edge, but her mind was already racing ahead, untangling the logic with effortless grace, each step invisible to the spectators, yet inexorably moving toward revelation. Nathan's glance sharpened, his usual composure cracking under the weight of expectation, as he realized this wasn't going to be the show he had anticipated. The underestimated server, the quiet observer, was about to transform the room with nothing but intellect and presence. Aaliyah shifted once more, subtly, her shoulders straightening, eyes narrowing with calm determination, and the tension in the room became almost tangible, like static before a lightning strike, while guests exchanged quick, curious glances, sensing that whatever was about to unfold would rewrite their assumptions about power, intelligence, and who truly held the key to victory that night. The room remained suspended in that tense, anticipatory silence as Aaliyah Johnson's mind moved with deliberate precision, tracing patterns invisible to everyone else and connecting dots with a clarity that made the air itself seem sharper. The soft glow of amber chandeliers bounced off the polished surfaces, reflecting glimpses of curious faces, murmurs muffled under the hum of the string quartet, and the faint clinking of glasses that punctuated the heavy stillness. Every step Nathan Clarke took, every subtle tilt of his head, was measured and commanding, but Aaliyah did not flinch, her focus unbroken as she visualized the solution forming layer by layer in her mind, a cascade of logic unfolding silently within her. The guests leaned forward slightly, forks held midair, as the tension coiled tighter, an invisible thread linking the precision of her thoughts to the collective breath of the room. She adjusted her stance, fingertips brushing the edge of the table without moving the tablet, her eyes scanning the figures and symbols with quiet calculation, a soft exhale releasing the only sound she permitted herself, one that carried more authority than any words Nathan had spoken. A waiter passed behind her, unnoticed, carrying crystal flutes, their reflections catching the faint glimmer of gold cutlery. But Aaliyah's awareness encompassed every micro-detail. The angle of the light on the tablet, the subtle curve in a formula, the misalignment Nathan had intentionally left as a trap, and the patterns in the audience's gaze as they awaited failure. The room's air felt heavy, charged with suspense, each heartbeat and footstep amplified in the collective consciousness of those present, as if the space itself recognized that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Aaliyah shifted her focus slightly, not outward to the expectant faces, but inward, to the calm reservoir of knowledge and experience that had brought her here, the countless nights she had spent studying systems, analyzing logic, and observing human behavior from the periphery. Nathan Clarke's smirk remained, though there was a subtle twitch in his jaw as he sensed the shift, an unspoken challenge rising in intensity as Aaliyah's eyes locked momentarily with his, steady, composed, and resolute. The guests whispered to one another, their voices barely audible over the hum of anticipation, sensing the subtle transformation in the energy, the balance of authority tilting imperceptibly toward the young waitress who had been underestimated. Each fraction of movement she made was precise, deliberate, a dance of intellect and poise, as her thoughts mapped the complexity Nathan had constructed and then began to untangle it with a quiet confidence that rendered the invisible visible, the impossible accessible. A flicker of recognition passed through her expression as she identified the final connection, the elegant thread linking the challenge's components into a coherent solution, and in that instant, the tension in the room became almost tangible, an electric current running through the air as guests exchanged startled glances. Nathan's eyes narrowed imperceptibly, the smirk faltering just slightly as he realized that the unexpected force before him, the one he had casually dismissed, was now poised to change everything in a manner he had neither predicted nor controlled. The string quartet's notes, delicate and steady, seemed to underscore the intensity, the rising suspense accentuated by the faint clatter of cutlery and the subtle movements of the waitstaff attending to other tables, none of which distracted from the silent storm converging on the tablet's display. Aaliyah inhaled deeply, the motion so slight it went unnoticed, and then, with a fluid motion of her hands brushing the edge of the device, she completed the unseen calculation, aligning the disparate elements into a cohesive whole that even Nathan had not anticipated, her confidence radiating without a single word, her presence commanding attention through sheer intellect. The guests collectively exhaled as if sensing the shift, their anticipation transforming into incredulity, the subtle gasps and widened eyes acknowledging that the balance of perception, authority, and expectation had irrevocably changed in the briefest moment, and in that charged silence, Aaliyah Johnson stood poised, resolute, and unmistakably brilliant, embodying the quiet power that comes from mastery and composure, the kind of presence that demands recognition without uttering a single word. The collective gasp of the guests hung in the air like a fragile crystal, each face reflecting astonishment, disbelief, and reluctant admiration as Aaliyah Johnson held her stance, calm and composed, the subtle sparkle of the chandelier catching the determined gleam in her eyes. Nathan Clarke's expression shifted from smug confidence to measured contemplation, his lips pressed into a thin line as he processed the elegance of her solution without a word, every micro-movement of his hands and shoulders betraying the first hints of respect forming under his carefully maintained arrogance. The murmurs that had begun as whispers rose imperceptibly into a quiet wave of fascination, eyes darting between the tablet and the poised waitress who had so effortlessly turned the tables of expectation, and in that stillness, the room felt simultaneously suspended and electric, as if time had slowed to measure the weight of intellect over status. Aaliyah's fingers hovered momentarily above the device, a subtle gesture of finality, and then she let her hands rest lightly, a quiet claim of victory that needed no sound to assert itself. The soft clinking of glass and silverware, once rhythmic and routine, now seemed to punctuate the gravity of the moment, each metallic note ringing like a bell signaling the shift of power, the silent acknowledgement that brilliance can reside in places overlooked, underestimated, and unseen. Nathan's gaze met hers, brief yet intense, the room sensing the unspoken conversation, the silent negotiation of acknowledgement between the architect of wealth and the quiet master of insight. Guests leaned closer, phones discreetly capturing the scene, aware that they were witnessing more than clever problem-solving. They were observing dignity, poise, and intellect asserting its rightful place in a world that often misjudges by appearances. The subtle aroma of truffle and roasted duck mingled with the faint fragrance of polished wood and candle wax, grounding the opulent scene in tangible reality. Yet the essence of the encounter was something far more abstract, a lesson in humility and recognition radiating without uttering a single syllable. Aaliyah's eyes scanned the room briefly, noting the widening awareness in faces that had been skeptical moments before, each realization contributing to a collective recalibration of assumptions, each glance a testament to the invisible preparation, the quiet hours of dedication that had led to this instantaneous display of mastery. Nathan shifted his weight, the metallic glint of his cufflinks catching the light as he subtly acknowledged the cleverness before him, a nod so slight that only the observant would detect it, yet it carried the weight of admiration and a grudging respect that altered the dynamics in the room irrevocably. The table of investors, previously poised in silent judgment, now held expressions of intrigue, some tentative, some awed, each recognizing the unfolding lesson in perception, patience, and the transformative power of intellect. Aaliyah's presence, serene yet commanding, conveyed more than competence. It radiated the quiet strength of resilience, the confidence of preparation, and the assurance that comes from mastery without the need for display, creating a palpable ripple that moved through the room with subtle insistence, shifting attention, altering expectations, and leaving an indelible impression. Nathan's smirk had disappeared entirely, replaced by a measured, almost contemplative composure as he watched Aaliyah step back from the tablet, shoulders squared, head held high, her calm and deliberate breathing marking a rhythm that the room could feel, a pulse of intellect and grace reverberating through the space. The light caught her hair in soft highlights, the gentle sway of her movements like choreography refined over years of quiet observation, each action deliberate, calculated, yet seemingly effortless, reinforcing the awe that had silently settled over the assembly. Guests exchanged glances, their own unspoken recognition of the subtle power dynamics at play, understanding that this was not a mere display of problem-solving but a demonstration of capability, dignity, and the often unseen worth that waits patiently for acknowledgement. Aaliyah's eyes lingered on the tablet, then swept the room with a soft intensity, her glance bridging the gap between observer and participant, intellect and humanity, and in that span of a heartbeat, the room collectively acknowledged the unseen hours, the skill, and the presence that commanded attention without force. Nathan's gaze followed hers briefly, a silent concession passing between them, the atmosphere thick with the weight of respect, the quiet recalibration of power, and the realization that brilliance, when paired with composure and integrity, cannot remain unnoticed. Each subtle movement, each carefully measured breath, and each silent acknowledgement combined to create a cinematic tension that wrapped around every guest like a current, connecting them to the unfolding narrative of underestimated talent rising to its rightful place, leaving the audience both inspired and irrevocably shifted in perspective. A strange thing happens when a room realizes it has judged someone incorrectly. The noise does not disappear. It changes shape. The conversations inside Veraritoss Lounge did not stop, but they softened into careful whispers, each sentence carrying curiosity instead of certainty. Aaliyah Johnson could feel it without looking directly at anyone. The same people who had barely noticed her 30 minutes earlier were now watching every movement she made as if they were searching for clues they had somehow missed. Nathan Clarke remained silent for several seconds, an eternity for a man whose confidence usually filled every corner of a room. The billionaire slowly reached for the tablet, studying the completed solution again, scrolling through the calculations with deliberate care. His expression revealed nothing at first, but the slight tightening around his eyes suggested something rare. Doubt. Not doubt about the answer. Doubt about his own assumptions. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering San Francisco skyline, thousands of lights stretching across the bay like scattered stars. Normally, Nathan loved moments like this. He loved being the smartest person in the room. He loved being the one everyone watched. Tonight felt different. Tonight the spotlight had shifted, and everyone knew it. A prominent venture capitalist seated near the center table leaned forward. "How did you see that pattern?" he asked. The question was directed toward Aaliyah, but it echoed across the room because everyone wanted the answer. Aaliyah looked at him calmly. She could feel dozens of eyes fixed on her. The temptation to explain everything existed, to prove herself, to demonstrate every step. Instead, she simply smiled. "I noticed something everyone else was too busy to notice." The answer was simple, yet somehow it landed harder than a long explanation ever could. Several guests exchanged glances. A few even nodded slowly. Nathan stared at her for a moment longer before setting the tablet down. For the first time that evening, there was no trace of arrogance in his posture. Only curiosity. Real curiosity. The kind that cannot be faked. Across the room, discreet phone cameras continued recording. Messages were already being typed beneath the tables. Texts were being sent to friends, colleagues, journalists, and social media accounts. Something unusual was happening. People could feel it. Aaliyah returned briefly to her responsibilities, lifting a serving tray and moving between tables with the same grace she had displayed earlier. Yet everything had changed. Guests who previously avoided eye contact now greeted her. Some thanked her. Others simply watched in amazement. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Respect had arrived only after. Proof. The irony hung in the air like perfume. Nathan noticed it too. He watched as investors who had laughed earlier suddenly spoke about talent, opportunity, and hidden potential. The transformation fascinated him because he recognized himself in their behavior. For years, he had built companies by identifying value where others saw nothing. That philosophy had earned him billions. Yet tonight he had failed to apply it to a human being standing only a few feet away. The realization settled heavily in his mind. Near the back of the room, an elderly guest adjusted his glasses and smiled. "Reminds me of something my grandfather used to say," he said. Several people turned toward him. Intelligence whispers. Ego shouts. The comment drifted through the room like a quiet breeze. Nobody laughed. Nobody interrupted. The words simply lingered. Nathan heard them clearly. So did Aaliyah. She continued moving through the dining room, maintaining her composure, but inside, memories were surfacing. Long nights studying after double shifts. Library tables occupied until closing time. Scholarship applications. Rejections. Interviews where people looked at her uniform before they listened to her ideas. Moments when she had learned that talent alone was not always enough to earn attention. Sometimes the world needed a dramatic demonstration before it would see what had been there all along. The string quartet transitioned into a softer melody, the notes floating through the golden light as the atmosphere shifted from shock to fascination. Nathan stood slowly from his chair. The movement immediately captured attention. Conversations faded. The room quieted once again. Every guest watched him. Every investor watched him. Every camera pointed toward him. But Nathan Clarke was no longer looking at the tablet. He was looking directly at Aaliyah Johnson. and for the first time that evening, he appeared far more interested in understanding her than in proving himself. The soft murmurs of amazement continued to ripple through Veraritoss Lounge as Aaliyah Johnson moved gracefully between tables, a gentle smile tracing her lips, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. Guests who had been skeptical moments before now regarded her with a quiet admiration, some leaning forward in their chairs, not to scrutinize, but to witness the dignity and mastery she carried effortlessly. Nathan Clarke, still standing near the head of the table, allowed a subtle exhale, the tension that had gripped him like a vice loosening slightly, as he studied the young waitress with renewed interest. The room itself seemed to breathe differently, the warm glow of the chandeliers reflecting on crystal glasses and polished cutlery, casting light that danced across astonished faces, each person processing the shift in dynamics that had occurred in the span of a few minutes. Aaliyah paused briefly at a corner table, placing a water glass with delicate precision, her eyes catching the flicker of admiration in the gaze of a prominent investor whose portfolio included some of the most formidable tech companies in the country. She offered no words, only presence, and the silent acknowledgement that she had exceeded expectations spoke volumes louder than any explanation could. Nathan finally lowered his eyes to the tablet, examining the solution she had completed, tracing the elegant lines and connections she had identified with meticulous care, his mind racing to reconcile his own assumptions with the undeniable display of intellect before him. The murmurs shifted again, this time more animated but restrained, as guests whispered among themselves about strategy, ingenuity, and the hidden value of observation and patience, the kind of insight that could only be acquired by someone accustomed to seeing beyond the obvious. A subtle breeze from the open windows carried the distant sound of the city at night, mingling with the soft strains of the string quartet, adding a cinematic rhythm to the charged atmosphere. Nathan stepped closer to the table, every movement deliberate, projecting a calm authority that masked the curiosity and surprise simmering beneath. Aaliyah looked up, meeting his gaze with a steady calm, her posture unwavering, a silent confidence that communicated as clearly as any words could. He inclined his head subtly, a gesture that carried acknowledgement and respect, recognizing not just the brilliance of the solution, but the composure, patience, and dignity with which it had been executed. Around them, the guests leaned in slightly, captivated by the unspoken interplay between experience, authority, and talent, each person sensing the weight of observation and judgment recalibrated in real time. The polished wooden floors reflected the soft light, the ambience of the lounge enriched by the quiet tension that had transformed into mutual recognition, the air electric with the silent language of respect and admiration. Aaliyah moved past Nathan with fluid motion, her eyes scanning the room briefly, noting the subtle nods and glances of appreciation from those who had underestimated her, each gesture reinforcing the quiet triumph she carried without ostentation. Nathan adjusted his cufflinks, a faint smile forming as he realized that the lesson of the evening was not in the tablet or the numbers, but in the quiet assertion of presence, intelligence, and poise. The scent of candles, truffle, and polished wood interwove with the soft notes of the music, anchoring the scene in sensory richness that made the moment tangible, almost cinematic, as if the entire lounge had been designed to spotlight a revelation that transcended the numerical challenge. Guests were now fully engaged, leaning back in their chairs only after a careful evaluation of what they had witnessed. The room transformed from an arena of subtle mockery to one of respect, curiosity, and an unspoken recognition that Aaliyah Johnson had shifted the narrative, demonstrating that excellence and dignity need no fanfare, that insight and preparation could command attention quietly yet irrevocably, and that a single presence, underestimated and unnoticed for so long, could redefine expectations and leave an indelible mark on everyone who had been present that night. For a few moments, nobody seemed interested in returning to their conversations. The challenge had ended, yet the energy inside Veraritoss Lounge continued to build, moving through the room like a current beneath still water. Nathan Clarke slowly pulled out a chair and sat down. But this time he was not positioned as the unquestioned center of attention. The shift was subtle, almost invisible, yet everyone could feel it. Across the dining room, Investors who normally discussed acquisitions, market forecasts, and billion-dollar ventures were discussing something entirely different. They were discussing Aaliyah Johnson. One guest spoke about pattern recognition. Another mentioned strategic thinking. A third quietly admitted that he had stared at the challenge for nearly 10 minutes before giving up. The realization seemed to spread from table to table. The solution had not been lucky. It had not been accidental. It had been exceptional. Aaliyah continued her work with the same calm professionalism she had displayed all evening. She collected empty glasses. She adjusted place settings. She thanked guests when they spoke to her. Nothing about her behavior suggested she was trying to enjoy the attention. In fact, the opposite seemed true. The more attention she received, the more grounded she appeared. That quiet confidence fascinated people. Most individuals became louder when they finally received recognition. Aaliyah became even calmer. Near the windows overlooking the San Francisco skyline, two venture capital partners exchanged observations in hushed voices. One of them glanced toward Aaliyah and shook his head slowly. "That kind of thinking cannot be taught overnight," he said. "That comes from years of discipline." His colleague nodded in agreement. They had spent decades evaluating talent, and they recognized what they were seeing. Excellence leaves clues. The challenge had simply revealed them. Nathan heard fragments of similar conversations all around him. Every comment seemed to reinforce the same uncomfortable truth. He had spent the evening assuming he understood exactly who Aaliyah was. He had been completely wrong. The realization lingered heavily in his thoughts. Success had trained him to trust his instincts. Tonight his instincts had failed, not because the signs were hidden, but because he had never looked closely enough to see them. The string quartet transitioned into another elegant melody, the notes floating through the golden light of the chandeliers. The atmosphere had transformed from spectacle into reflection. Guests were no longer reacting to a puzzle. They were reflecting on their own assumptions. That made the moment far more powerful. Aaliyah approached a nearby table carrying a tray of sparkling water. An older woman seated among the guests smiled warmly. "You handled all of that with remarkable grace," she said. The compliment was sincere. Aaliyah thanked her politely. Nothing more. The woman seemed surprised by the simplicity of the response. As Aaliyah moved away, the guest watched her with visible admiration. In a room filled with people who spent enormous energy proving themselves, the young waitress appeared completely comfortable with who she already was. That confidence could not be purchased. It could not be inherited. It had been earned. Nathan slowly stood once again. This time there was no challenge waiting. No competition. No dramatic announcement. Yet the movement immediately drew attention. Conversations softened. Heads turned. The billionaire looked around the room before his gaze settled on Aaliyah. There was a sincerity in his expression now that had not existed earlier in the evening. The arrogance had faded. The performance had ended. What remained was curiosity mixed with respect. He took several measured steps forward. The polished floor reflected the glow of the chandeliers beneath his feet. Every guest watched carefully. Phones were lowered. Whispers stopped. The entire room seemed to understand that something important was about to happen. Nathan reached the center of the dining room and paused. Aaliyah turned toward him, her posture relaxed, her expression calm. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. The silence felt larger than any speech. Then Nathan looked directly at her and asked a question nobody in the room expected. "How long have you been hiding this?" The words landed softly, yet they carried enough weight to silence every remaining sound in the lounge. Because for the first time all evening, Nathan Clarke was no longer asking about a solution. He was asking about the person behind it. The room remained hushed as Aaliyah Johnson took a subtle step back, her eyes scanning the faces around her, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the softened expressions, the way people leaned forward as if trying to capture every nuance of her presence. Nathan Clarke remained stationary for a moment longer, studying her as though attempting to measure the depth of her mind, the hidden reservoir of focus, experience, and quiet mastery that had brought her to this instant. The golden glow from the chandeliers reflected on the polished floors, casting long, soft shadows that intertwined with the glimmer of crystal glasses and silverware, making every movement in the room feel more deliberate, more charged. Aaliyah moved toward a corner of the lounge, adjusting the placement of a wine glass with practiced care, and every gesture, simple as it was, seemed to communicate more than any words could, a statement of confidence, skill, and dignity that had nothing to prove and everything to demonstrate. Nathan took a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing imperceptibly, the tension that had filled the air earlier easing as he absorbed the quiet authority emanating from her. Guests who had whispered in doubt minutes earlier now watched with rapt attention, their own discussions muted, replaced by the realization that they were witnessing more than clever problem-solving. They were observing integrity, composure, and the calm assertion of potential previously underestimated. Across the room, a younger investor shifted in his chair, leaning closer to a colleague. "I have never seen anything like this," he said quietly. She did not just solve it. She owned it. The words floated through the ambient hum, catching in the ears of others, spreading like a ripple that carried admiration and astonishment. The string quartet transitioned into a softer, more contemplative melody, the notes weaving through the warm air, emphasizing the shift in energy, the subtle recalibration of power and attention. Nathan stepped closer, his polished shoes gliding silently on the floor, and paused just a few feet from Aaliyah. The silence was palpable, filled with anticipation and unspoken acknowledgement. He extended a hand, not in condescension, but in recognition, his eyes meeting hers with a rare, unguarded sincerity. Aaliyah regarded him calmly, the corners of her mouth lifting in a faint, polite acknowledgement, understanding the significance of the gesture without requiring verbal affirmation. Around them, guests leaned slightly forward, capturing every movement, every glance, aware that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in a world defined by appearances, assumptions, and the subtle exercise of influence. Nathan nodded once, a slight movement that conveyed more than any speech, and the gesture resonated through the room, setting a tone of respect, acknowledgement, and shared understanding. Aaliyah adjusted her posture slightly, shoulders back, chin level, as she returned to her duties, carrying the air of someone who had faced scrutiny, expectation, and challenge and emerged recognized, not through boast, but through presence, skill, and quiet mastery. The murmurs that had spread moments before had softened into reflective silence, guests observing each other and themselves, considering how easily perception can mislead, how easily talent can go unnoticed, and how profoundly a single display of poise and intellect can alter assumptions. Nathan took one last measured glance at the assembled room, absorbing the subtle acknowledgement and respect that now filled the air, realizing that tonight, the lesson was not just about numbers, logic, or skill, but about patience, observation, and the power of understated excellence. Aaliyah moved past him with the same grace she had shown all evening, her footsteps light on the polished wood, each movement a quiet testament to preparation, confidence, and the invisible hours of dedication that had brought her to this transformative moment, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. The evening should have ended there. In most stories, the challenge is solved, the room applauds, and everyone returns to their lives unchanged. But something different was happening inside Veraritoss Lounge. The atmosphere had evolved beyond admiration into something far more powerful. Curiosity. The guests no longer wanted to know what Aaliyah Johnson had done. They wanted to know who she was. The distinction mattered. One celebrated a moment. The other revealed a person. Nathan Clarke understood that better than anyone. Throughout his career, he had built companies by searching for hidden opportunities others overlooked. Entire industries had been transformed because he recognized value before the crowd did. Yet tonight, he found himself confronting an uncomfortable reality. He had completely failed to recognize the extraordinary potential standing only a few feet away. The realization lingered as he watched Aaliyah continue serving guests with the same quiet professionalism she had displayed before the challenge began. Nothing about her behavior suggested she was enjoying a personal victory. She was not telling the story. She was not seeking attention. She was simply doing her job. Somehow that made the moment even more remarkable. A group of investors near the center of the room invited Aaliyah into a conversation. Their questions came carefully, respectfully. Where had she studied? What was her background? Had she worked in technology before? Aaliyah listened politely before answering. Her responses were brief, thoughtful, and unexpectedly ordinary. She explained that she had spent years teaching herself advanced subjects through online courses, public libraries, and countless hours of independent study. She spoke about learning during lunch breaks, after long shifts, and on weekends when most people were resting. The more she spoke, the quieter the room became. Not because her story was dramatic, because it was disciplined. There was no secret benefactor, no miraculous opportunity, no privileged shortcut, just persistence, the kind most people admire but rarely choose for themselves. Nathan listened closely. Every answer seemed to challenge another assumption. Across the room, several guests exchanged glances of disbelief. One woman quietly shook her head. Most people would have given up, she whispered. Aaliyah heard her and smiled gently. Maybe, she replied. But giving up never seemed useful. The simplicity of the answer landed with surprising force. It was not motivational. It was practical, honest, real. The city lights beyond the massive windows sparkled against the darkness of the bay, creating a breathtaking backdrop to the conversation unfolding inside. The string quartet continued playing softly, yet even the music seemed secondary now. The real performance had become a lesson in perspective. Nathan slowly approached again, this time carrying no challenge, no tablet, and no performance. The billionaire who had commanded the room earlier now appeared genuinely interested in listening. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the sharp confidence that had defined him at the start of the evening. You taught yourself all of that while working here? Aaliyah nodded. Among other places. Nathan stared at her for a moment, processing the answer. Around them, dozens of guests watched silently. They expected a speech. They expected a dramatic reaction. Instead, Nathan laughed softly, not from amusement, but from disbelief at himself. He glanced around the room before speaking again. Do you know what is strange? Aaliyah tilted her head slightly. Nathan smiled. I spent half the night believing I was testing you. He paused. The room grew completely still. Even the faint clinking of glasses disappeared. Nathan looked directly at her. Turns out you were teaching all of us. The words settled over the room like warm light. Nobody rushed to respond. Nobody interrupted. Because deep down, everyone understood the truth behind them. The challenge had never been about intelligence alone. It had exposed something far more revealing. How quickly people judge. How easily talent is overlooked. And how often greatness arrives wearing a uniform nobody thinks twice about. For the first time all evening, the entire room seemed united by the same realization. They had come expecting to witness a contest. Instead, they had witnessed a lesson. The room exhaled collectively, a subtle, almost imperceptible release of tension that had held everyone captive since the first glance at the tablet. Aaliyah Johnson continued moving with graceful assurance, placing glasses, adjusting napkins, and attending to the subtle needs of each table with quiet precision, her presence a gentle reminder that true mastery is often invisible until revealed. Nathan Clarke remained rooted near the center, studying her not with judgment, but with something new, genuine admiration mixed with introspection, an awareness that he had underestimated a force far greater than any challenge he could construct. Guests leaned forward, their curiosity now tempered by respect, their eyes tracking every micro-expression, every careful step, as if reading a story that unfolded in silence. The soft notes of the string quartet wrapped around the space like a velvet embrace, highlighting the golden light that danced across the polished floors and crystal reflections, each subtle glimmer marking a shift in perception, a recalibration of expectations, and a quiet acknowledgement of talent unveiled. Aaliyah paused briefly, glancing toward Nathan, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange that conveyed recognition without speech, the subtle nod of mutual understanding bridging the invisible divide between authority and brilliance. Conversations resumed slowly around them, hushed but deliberate, the discussion moving away from casual social banter into analysis, curiosity, and admiration, guests now reflecting on the lessons demonstrated, persistence, observation, and quiet excellence. Nathan finally stepped forward, his movements deliberate, measured, conveying more than words could, a subtle acknowledgement of the intelligence, composure, and dedication that Aaliyah carried effortlessly. She returned his gaze steadily, her posture confident, grounded, and unwavering, demonstrating that accomplishment can exist without assertion, and recognition does not require demand. Across the room, subtle nods of acknowledgement passed between guests, the ripple effect of realization spreading from one table to another, each person reconsidering their assumptions about value, potential, and the silent strength that often goes unnoticed in daily observation. The warm light, the soft music, and the subtle scent of candles and fine dining intertwined to create an atmosphere of reflection and reverence, each sensory detail magnifying the significance of the evening's revelation. Nathan Clarke finally offered a small smile, one that was genuine and unguarded, carrying the weight of understanding, appreciation, and a recognition of skill that had been previously invisible. Aaliyah returned to her tasks, moving with calm authority, each action purposeful yet unassuming, demonstrating the quiet power of competence combined with integrity. The guests observed, captivated not by spectacle, but by authenticity, the moment transforming from a simple demonstration of intellect into a profound reminder of human potential, diligence, and the subtle, powerful impact of quiet excellence. The city lights twinkled beyond the vast windows, reflecting the brilliance of the night, while inside, the lounge held a shared awareness that something rare and remarkable had been witnessed, a lesson in observation, patience, and the strength of understated mastery, leaving everyone present with a lasting impression of what it truly means to be seen and acknowledged for who they are, beyond expectation, beyond appearance, and beyond assumption.